Huawei, which makes everything from phones, like the just announced Mate X, yeah, the one that stole some of Samsung's folding thunder, to the communications equipment that connects all phones, including the upcoming 5G networks. Huawei is claiming the United States is unfairly, unconstitutionally even, keeping them out of the country, out of deals with major telecommunications companies like AT&T and Verizon, and out of the hands of consumers. The US government claims Huawei's close ties to the Chinese government make it a threat to national security and to the privacy of American citizens. In other words, that Huawei equipment, from handsets to infrastructure, will be used to spy on Americans, Canadians, Brits, and pretty much everyone else, and is pressuring other governments to keep them out as well. Huawei claims not, and Huawei is calling foul. So are Americans being kept safe, or are they simply being denied the best gear at the best price, or maybe just cheaper gear at a cheaper price? I'm not smart enough to answer any of that, but I am smart enough to ask someone on who is. So let's talk Huawei. I'm Rene Ritchie, and this is Vector. Carolina Milanesi is consumer tech analyst at Creative Strategies and is one of the brightest and most insightful people in the industry. How are you, Carolina?
I'm all right. I'm almost over my jet lag from Barcelona, so you catch me at a good time.
Oh, but you had Yamal, so I'm just going to be jealous. I'm not really.
I know, and a lot of cava.
Oh, so good. So I guess let's start with the phones. I've seen rave reviews on them, but how good are they, hardware speaking? From the build quality, to the custom Kirin silicon, to the screen tech, to the modems, to the cameras, compared to like, say, the Apples and Samsungs that most consumers are familiar with. Where does Huawei stack up?
Well, I think that Huawei has made a huge improvement over quality for a long time, right? When they started out, they were your kind of traditional Chinese vendor that was shooting from the hip and trying to get products out as quickly as possible. And the quality was suffering because of that. But now they are, they are the number two in the world, and then they act as one when it comes to the quality of the devices. Now, I think when you look at the detail of the silicon, it's a bit harder for me to judge, because what comes to the US is not optimized, right? So there are phones that are built for other regions, and so it's kind of harder to really see the performance that you get if it's that true to a carrier in the US or not, because we can't get them over here.
It's like a race car that hasn't had that last tuning.
Correct. I always enjoy when people post comparison with different devices, because I think photography is such a personal thing. Yeah. But you can't deny that they've done a great job with that phone, with the multiple camera and some smartness as well. But I think that's where, and I don't know if you're going to ask me or not, but I'm going to kind of go there. For me, where you start to see the struggle, if you like, of a Huawei phone is the software. And part of it you can see in the camera as well from a UI perspective. This is a problem that I always say Android vendors have, which is struggling to differentiate, right? Struggling not to have your vanilla Android take over you as a vendor. And some have made the choice due to lack of resources. And, Huawei is still trying to differentiate. And unfortunately, I think that's where you see cultural differences in what people like and don't like, and added steps that shouldn't be there just because you're trying to do something different.
I think a lot of vendors, when trying to decide between too few and too many options, always seem to go down the path of too many.
Yeah, and I know it's hard, right? Because at the end of the day, on a hardware perspective, yes, you differentiate, but you go into a store and it's kind of hard to, have a salesperson spend 45 minutes with you telling you why your camera is better than somebody else's camera. And so you think that by making it look different, there's an appeal there. But when looking different is just for the sake of it, and it doesn't actually help the user navigate your device better, it becomes a hindering factor.
Okay, so shifting gears into infrastructure, especially with the advent of 5G, how important a player is Huawei in all of that? Is their tech better, cheaper, some combination of the two?
I don't cover infrastructure as much as in detail as I do hardware and services, but I've been around long enough, sadly, to remember when we had more choice in infrastructure and when, Alcatel-Lucent was
Yeah.
actually still Alcatel, and they were selling phones to the carriers because of their infrastructure business. So they would go in and offer that end-to-end experience and saying their phones were better tuned to the network and were delivering a superior experience, and Huawei has talked the same talk even over LTE, and now with 5G, the choices are what they are. And I think I don't know, from a consumer perspective, is it true, is it not, and do you care that your phone is better tuned with the hardware, with the infrastructure hardware? No, you don't. From a carrier perspective, you might be interested in that, and obviously from a supplier point of view, being able to get both from one place and get one level of support and all of that plays a role. But I think when it comes to infrastructure and Huawei, there's more at stake right now that is linked to politics and the role that China is going to play in 5G than anything else. And it was fascinating to me being, the American, but with European roots in Europe for Mobile World Congress, having the press ask questions about, why is it so different in the US? What's going on? Why are we doing here? Is the pressure coming from the US gonna, get the European carriers to change what they have? And that's a big business. You have
Yeah.
carriers in Europe that have put gear, Huawei gear already in the network, ripping everything out. It's not going to just be costly, but it's going to set them back in the rollout of 5G.
And maybe I'm wrong on this, so you tell me, but why does it seem like we have so few options when it comes to communications infrastructure? I mean, I'm Canadian, so I remember Nortel, but it doesn't seem like there are many alternatives anymore. Why are none of the big American companies doing any of this stuff? Why don't we hear about Apple or Google or Samsung or Sony infrastructure the way we hear about Huawei?
It's a tough business to be in, and I think is I think it's unfair to say it gives Huawei an advantage because there's less player in the market. Because at the end of the day, if you're not good at what you're doing, you're not good. But you also need to look at their history. That's what they done, and it always amazes me when I go to China. They have a once a year big analyst, both financial and industry analyst event around about April. And the level of business, like the breadth of the business that they have outside of China, it's teeny weeny compared to what they do in China. In China, they
Yep.
do have set-top boxes, they do have services. They even offer the ability on their phones to roam at a flat rate across 20 Asian countries. Something that no players has done here in the US or even in Europe. Their power in within the China market is so much bigger than what we see, where we often just even do phones.
So you touched on this briefly already, but right now we see the US aggressively banning Huawei and ZTE. I should point out Huawei is not being completely singled out. While in Canada they're still able to operate, and if memory serves, it's still up for grabs in the UK and EU and even Australian markets. Why do you think we're seeing such a range of responses from the different governments in the different regions?
I think the areas, so you're looking at the regions, right? And I do think this has a lot to do with politics and the importance that AI and 5G has on the economy of big countries like the US, China, and the EU. And, specifically, you see China and the US in this trade war that is going to go on to become a tech war. And Huawei is the poster child for that war. Yes, ZTE has been, caught up in this, but started out for different reasons, right? And there's a difference between the network and the phones, and we lump everything in. I really don't think that, even if the Chinese government might be interested in getting involved in um, Huawei spying or whatever you want to call it, my life is not that interesting. I don't really think that they're going to put something in my phone. But of course, you're talking about infrastructure, and the stakes go up, right? And so there is a higher concern. I think the other part that kind of singles Huawei out is the company, and the fact that the company is very tightly linked with the government. The founder is an ex-army general
People
of the
Liberation
Chinese
Army,
army.
yeah.
Thank you very much. So I think there's that as well that plays a role.
In a way, it reminds me of Google or Facebook. In the end, it doesn't really matter if you choose not to use Gmail or post on a Facebook wall, if the person you're emailing uses Gmail or is posting all your party pictures on Facebook. So in the same bent, does it really matter if the US tries to restrict Huawei's access if many of the countries America does business with are all up in their infrastructure?
But that's the argument that the government is making, right? So the US government is gone to different countries and say, hey, we're not going to share sensitive information with you unless you are not on a Huawei network and infrastructure. That's what their position is. How easy is that to do? Is that just trying to flex their muscle to get other governments to comply? But I don't know how, if you're looking at the UK, what is the government going to do? Are they going to back up their own operators, or are they just going to listen to what the US government is saying? It is hard to balance all of that, and we'll see how it's going to shake out. I do think that given just the sentiment around some of the decisions that the US government has made, in not just in trade, but if you're thinking about the wealth of the earth and all of that, I don't know. I don't know if flexing their muscle is going to be the right thing to do here, and if government are going to basically say, okay, we're not going to let somebody come in our house and tell us what to do.
So it doesn't seem like Huawei will win this lawsuit, or at least Kaspersky didn't win their very similar lawsuit when they were banned following security concerns over their possible ties to the Russian government. But how do you think consumers should look at all this? Thinly veiled protectionism from governments that can no longer compete with homegrown technology all their own? Or an earnest effort, a real effort to protect their citizens from legitimate security and privacy concerns? Or again, a little bit of both?
I think that a bit of both, if you believe that the second part, so protecting us, is genuine, and I'm a bit skeptical about that. I do think that has more to do with protectionism, and as I said, and thinking about where from an economic perspective, how much we have to lose if China is going to go ahead, and you see the power as a market that China has. Nobody else has that power, just of the sheer number of people. And you're at the point now with things like AI, where that's what you need. You need people, you need users, you need data, and then you build from there. So I think there's a lot there. And AI and 5G are very, very intertwined, right? One is not going to exist without the other. Yeah. And I think that's what some people maybe are not focusing on, and it just seems like it's about the phones, and it isn't.
And last question, just because it's you, it's because I have you here, and I have to ask, I know it's still early in the year, but we've already seen Unpacked, we've already seen Mobile World Congress. We're not going to see iPhones or the Galaxy Note until the fall, but how is this year shaping up for you so far? Are there any big trends you're tracking? Anything major that vendors really have to do in 2019 to stand out from what seems like an even bigger, even stronger crowd?
I'm excited about the variety of form factors that I saw at Mobile World Congress. It's nice to not just see rectangular pieces of glass anymore. And a lot of it is not going to come to fruition this year, right? And I've been saying we're going to kiss a lot of frogs before we get to the prince. But I really hope that the vendors are going to start thinking about what is coming next. And I'm not talking about technology and form factor only, but when you're thinking about ambient computing and the fact that now our computing power is shared across so many different devices, what is the role of the phone going to be? How is that role changing? And therefore, how do I change the shape of that phone to make it fit better within the ecosystem of devices that I use, and still get the same return of investment that I have today? And it's not a question of moving away from the phone being important. At the end of the day, I don't see anything else that is going to be with us and has the same kind of emotional connection that we have today with the phone. Is a question of the phone really evolving to stay at the focal point of our life. And that's what I really hope to see vendors will do this year.
It's got to be like Madonna style reinvention.
That's right. Yeah, it is, right? And that's the key, is how do you reinvent yourself to remain relevant to the user? And that's how you win this. It's not a question of, the more you put on the device. And I think sometimes putting less is a more difficult choice than not giving more to someone.
Okay, so if you were Tim Apple and you'd seen the Galaxy S10 and everything else so far, where would you be thinking about positioning the iPhone, both for the end of this year and going forward?
Continue to deliver an experience, not a piece of hardware, right? And delivering that experience is a question of bringing together the software, the services, and the hardware. And I think at the end of the day, even when you look at something like foldables, right, which are, I think, a very good example of something that, unless you own all the pieces, is really hard to pull off. Right? You were looking at people commenting on the two foldables that were launched so far, so the Huawei and the Samsung, and saying these are prototypes, they're not ready. No, they're not. They are. The hardware is ready. The software is not. The apps are not. And there's no one other than Apple that controls all these pieces. And that's, the best way to try and change direction or try and deliver, new ideas or form factors or services, is controlling the whole part of it.
Thank you so much for joining me, Carolina. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. I now feel like I'm cool that I do video.
You're cool. And please, everyone, go follow her on Twitter at Caro_Milanese and read all her fine work at techpinions.com. Now, if you're like me and you want to get as smart as Carolina is one day, check out Brilliant. Brilliant's daily problems are fun, bite-sized ways to master concepts by applying them. Each problem comes with illustrations, animations, or interactive visualizations, and all the context you need to solve the problem yourself. If you like the problem and want to learn more, there's a related course that explores the same concept in greater detail. Here's one for today. Can you make a password that's both secure and yet easy for you to remember? Even if you use a password manager, you still need that one master password. So how far can you take it? And that's just one example out of many. So if you want to actively learn new, fascinating concepts each day and get 20% off the annual subscription to view all the problems in the archive, just be one of the first 200 to head on over to brilliant.org/vector and finish your day a little smarter every day. Thanks, Brilliant, and thanks to all of you for supporting the show. So, for Huawei, to be continued. As of right now, though, depending on how you look at it, either most Americans don't have easy access to some of the best phones on the market and won't have access at all to some of the most popular 5G infrastructure in the industry, possibly holding back deployment and even potential business opportunities that will come with it, or are among the only people with a government willing to protect them from the attacks and invasions of a foreign government intent on plundering their trade secrets and outflanking them in a trade war and potentially a cyber war to come. Anyway, I don't know what to think about all this yet, so you tell me. What do you think? Hit like, hit subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And then hit up the comments below and let me know where you stand on Huawei, both its phones and its infrastructure. And thank you so much for watching.